Leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. As we're being warned to stay out of the sun and keep as cool as possible this week, we've got a level 3 heatwave alert for much of England, one below a national emergency. 33.3 degrees recorded today in Celsius in Suffolk, and hotter to come later in the week. I'm going to be back in the UK tomorrow. I'm currently in Washington, D.C., still speaking at a conference later today where it just rains endlessly. Hard to believe. I had to get away to get some cooler weather. But politically, the really hot topic today is, of course, about the story of the so-called Beatles. They were called that because they spoke with British accents. It's difficult to think, actually, of a more inappropriate name for them. But they were a 4-man Islamic State execution cell. They operated in Iraq and in Syria, and they all carried British passports. Perhaps the most famous of them, or infamous of them, was known as Jihadi John Mohammed Emwazi, and he was killed by a US airstrike back in 2015. Ain Davis was another, and he is now in jail in Turkey. But two of them, Alexander Cote and El Shafi El Sheikh, are being held by US forces and are about to be deported to the United States of America to face charges. And all of this has led to a big row over the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, and if they went to America, would they face the death penalty? Well, earlier on today, Security Minister Ben Wallace topic in the House of Commons.
I can reassure the House that our long-standing position on the use of the death penalty has not changed. The UK has a long-standing policy of opposing the death penalty as a matter of principle, regardless of nationality. We act compatibly with the ECHR. In accordance with the government's overseas security and justice assistance guidance, we have taken into account human rights considerations.
And yet, Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, in a letter with Jeff Sessions, the US Attorney General, has told us he has not sought assurances that the death penalty will not be applied, perhaps, to these two men. Well, Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott responded to this situation.
One of our strengths as a country is our willingness to stand up unflinchingly for human rights. It is a key aspect of our soft power. So the Minister will understand the widespread concern that the government seems willing to abandon its long-standing, principled opposition to the death penalty in this case. Ministers claim that the decision in this case does not reflect a change in our policy on assistance in US death penalty cases generally, nor the UK government's stance on the global abolition of the death penalty. But I put it to ministers, they cannot be a little bit in favour of the death penalty. Either we offer consistent opposition or we don't.
Now, Security Minister Ben Wallace there mentioned the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, and we, of course, are signed up to that convention. In fact, you cannot be a member of the European Union and not be signed up to that convention. So the death penalty is illegal for any EU member, although, of course, we abolished the death penalty long before we joined what was called the common market. The last people to be hanged in our country were back in 1964, and we had a sort of moratorium for a few years in the middle late 60s, and in 1969 the death penalty was abolished in our country. There were 2 free votes in Parliament, one in 1979, one in 1994, and they, of course, failed. I have to say, I don't think there's any prospect of the death penalty being brought back in our country, even post-Brexit. Even if we were allowed to do it, I think there's been a big generational shift on this issue. I don't think we want the death penalty in the United Kingdom. But it is worth bearing in mind that Alexander Cote and El Shafi El Sheikh are no longer British citizens. They have had that privilege removed, which is important, I think, in this case. And yet there are some very odd things going on here, because on the one hand, we've allowed 400 people who fought with Islamic State in Syria to come back into our country, and they're now, as we speak, freely walking the streets of Britain, and yet it has been British government policy that it's absolutely no problem to kill these people using drone strikes, whether that's either done by the Americans or by the Royal Air Force, whilst they're there on active service in Syria. And back in October 2017, as we debated this story, I pointed out the sheer hypocrisy of this. So it's okay to bomb them and kill them when they're out there in Syria, but equally it's fine to let them back into the United Kingdom. Something wrong there, I suggest. Also, interestingly, the Conservative government, the last one, this one, are perfectly happy to kill British citizens out in Syria, yet of course we'd never, ever, ever use the death penalty for anybody here in this country. So we're all over the place on this. We really are. And I'm going to suggest to you, I really am going to suggest to you, that the real outrage here is not that two ex-British citizens could be extradited to America and could face the death penalty under US law. That the real outrage is that we've allowed 400 potentially very dangerous people back onto our streets. And it's odd, isn't it? One day it's fine to kill them, but once they get back to the UK, they can live as free men. I find that really, really odd. I want to ask you, is Sajid Javid right not to seek assurances against the death penalty for these two ISIS fighters? And if you think, actually, this goes against our moral standing in the world, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think they had their British citizens stripped from them for entirely the right reasons, and what happens next is not our responsibility. Text to 84850. And I'm particularly keen to get a sort of feedback. If you're a US citizen, seeing what's going on here, tell me what you think about this potential row that is now taking place between the British opposition and the way that America does things. And you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Messages coming in already. I think the majority of British people would say hang them, stuff their human rights, says Terry. I'm not sure a majority would say that, Terry, but certainly a considerable number would probably agree with you. On Twitter, they're fighters for an enemy state, they're not our problem. I hope the US does execute them, says Rena. Hi, Nigel. Well done to Sajid Javid. My main concern is the opportunity cost of returning these hideous murderers for a certain lifetime of expensive incarceration after wasting a mint on legal aid. Tom, I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that too, but there are many who are opposed to the death penalty in principle. And I understand what Diane Abbott was saying in the House of Commons, but why were they not criticising when the Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon at the time, said you are a valid target if you're in Syria, and whether it's the RAF or whether it's the US Air Force, we will kill you. Where were the criticisms then? Why is there so much hypocrisy round all of this? Let's go to Kevin in Rickmansworth, a new caller to this show. Kevin, good evening.
Good evening. You call a long-time listener, Nigel. I actually don't agree with you that we are against the death penalty. I've heard a lot today people say the British people have an aversion to it. Well, I've never been asked. I think we should have a referendum. I'm sorry if that upsets, Cameron, Carney, Clegg, and even James O'Brien, but I actually think we should. And just before anyone says it, can I just also say there's nothing to do with being anti-Islam or anything like that, because I can give you some other names. Huntley, Sutcliffe, Shipley, Hindley, etc., etc., Mr. and Mrs. West. I think if you ask the majority of the British people what they thought, they might very well surprise you and have a return to a death penalty. I don't think that it hurts our moral standing, as you said, because America has the death penalty in several states, and I don't think it's hurt their moral standing.
So, Kevin, your personal position is you'd like a referendum on the death penalty and you'd vote for its restoration, yeah?
I would vote for it in 2 seconds. I think it would have to be, before everyone phones up and says, "Oh, what about when we executed people who were innocent?" I think it would have to be some very strict criteria as to when you could use it. For instance, Mr. and Mrs. West or whatever. It would have to be guilt proven beyond every conceivable doubt. And now we have the DNA scenario. I think it's much easier to do that. But in terms of these two alleged killers, frankly, whether they were British citizens, whether they had that citizenship revoked or not, I know they have, but even if they hadn't, I wouldn't have had a problem with handing over to the Americans, and whatever the American form of justice is, whether that means execution or life imprisonment, either way, fine by me.
No, well, Kevin, I must say, on the death penalty itself, and I will wait to give you my view on that. You may be right, I may be wrong. I just see a generational shift, and I sense that most young people just would not vote for it. I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that. But as far as these two people are concerned, the one thing I am pleased about, and I've been saying for years, these people should be stripped of their citizenship, and I'm pleased in this case they were, but I'm still, Kevin, bewildered that, Sajid Javid doesn't seek these assurances from Jeff Sessions in America. We're happy to take people out using drone strikes, and yet, Kevin, there are 400 of these people wandering our streets. That's the bit that gets me.
Well, also, of course, and I know this is not directly connected to the EU, but the Human Rights Act, I suspect, is at the heart of this, and it's probably why we weren't hugely confident of getting a conviction if they were tried in this country. I suspect it's a semi-cop-out, and the sooner we come out of the Human Rights Act, the better, I think.
Well, I think that's right, and I think had they been tried in this country, the appeals using the Human Rights Act would have gone on absolutely forever. Kevin, thank you for your call. Couldn't be clearer where you stand. Seema says we will never have a referendum again on the death penalty. Seema, we've never had one. All right. Only national referendums we've ever had in our country. We've had 2 on the European question and 1 on a very odd change to our voting system. And Joy says, let them die. Who cares? Shame we don't have the death penalty here. And it is worth remembering that these 4 people with their British accents and British passports who were known as the Beatles were involved in the killing, beheading of high-profile Western captives, including the British aid workers David Haynes and Alan Henning and the US journalists James Foley and Stephen Sotlov. They were the most barbaric, appalling human beings. Of that, I think we can all agree. But is it right that the Home Secretary is happy for them to be sent to the US, where they may face the death penalty? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC, and it's now 7:15. Well, in many ways, I think it's summed up for me by Andrew on Facebook, who says, they've been stripped of British citizenship, we've washed our hands of them, so let them go to the USA. Andrew, I have to say that is rather the view I take. I don't think this is the outrage. I think the outrage is that we've allowed 400 of these people back onto our streets in our country. That is the outrage for me. A lot of debate here about the merits or demerits of the death penalty, and some of you saying you'd like it back in our country. But Peter says it's a worrying precedent to set. Extraditing British citizens to face the death penalty, no matter what they've done, is potentially a very slippery slope. So a word of warning there from Peter on Facebook. Let's go to Simon in Swindon, who's a new caller to this show. Good evening, Simon.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm truly overwhelmed, believe me. Talking to two legends.
Well, that's very sweet of you. Now, so, is Sajid Javid right? I mean, they're not British citizens anymore.
God, listen, his spin doctors must be on so many Red Bulls, it's unbelievable. He has no way of stopping them going. We've washed our hands with him, we've taken our citizenship away from them. What has he got to keep them to get them to come to the country? And if they do come to the country, what will they get? What will they get? 3 meals a day, a gym, a TV, a free TV, everything. Well, we got our soldiers sleeping rough on the streets. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
Do you think, Simon, do you think it was right to strip them of their British citizenship?
Absolutely.
So do I.
And I think you're being very, very conservative about the 400 number. Very conservative.
Who knows? It could be more. Whatever it is, it's a very serious problem. I just couldn't get it into my head last year, Simon, that, on a Wednesday, they're in Syria, and we're being told it's absolutely fine to kill them. And on a Thursday, welcome back to the United Kingdom. All's great. I couldn't believe that situation.
We're being told that the government is saying, look, we're going to take them back. They're going to be prioritised on the housing list and given money as to calm them down. Oh, my God, come on. What have we become?
Well, pathetic in many ways. Pathetic, yeah, Simon, in many ways. And Simon, let me ask you, on the issue of the death penalty itself, would 100%. You like to see a reintroduction of it? You would.
If you've got any of your viewers, or any listeners rather, listening to this, and they're doubting this, tell them to look deeply on some websites and see what has happened to children and women over there, and men. then
Yes.
there's no way. I mean, I am against the death penalty in a way, because you have the things back in the 60s where people were hanged and it shouldn't have really been done. But this has gone beyond. It's satanic. It's disgusting.
Right. So what you're saying, Simon, is you've got no qualms about the death penalty for people who have for people who fought with ISIS, but you wouldn't want to see it brought back generally in the UK.
Not generally, but not. I mean, look at the state of the country. Where do we go?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, we've got a lot of problems. I'm not sure hanging a few people every year would help it. But, Simon, I do understand your sentiment about the sheer barbarism. And these two guys were involved right in the middle of it. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Going to go to Holborn and speak to Gerard, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Gerard.
How you doing, Nigel?
I'm doing very well. So, was the Home Secretary right not to be worried about these people going to America, even if he did have the power to make a difference?
Well, I'd say it's hypocrisy, really. You know, he's basically decided that the European Convention on Human Rights doesn't apply to Britain no more. And Britain hasn't got a penalty itself for death, but he's basically saying it's fine for other nations to sanction it.
Well, I suppose if they were still British citizens, that would be true. But given we've stripped them of British citizenship, he hasn't really got much of a say anyway, Gerard, has he?
It's very ironic that Britain would get on its high horse now after it openly sent and encouraged jihadists to go to Libya, for instance, in 2011, during the destruction of that nation, that they're now getting on their high horse and moaning about these people they facilitated to go to that nation. And saying, I don't think
the British state encouraged people to go, did they?
Remember in 2011 when you were going to Libya, war in that country, you were hailing these people as freedom fighters, as rebels.
Okay. No. I understand that argument, and equally, you know, there was in 2013 a very big debate about whether we should arm the rebels in Syria, and if we'd done that, if William Hague and David Cameron had got their way, we almost certainly would have finished up funding, in some part, people fighting for ISIS. Gerard, let me ask you more broadly about this issue of the death penalty. How do you feel about it?
Well, you know, I've no time for these individuals, and I would say, you know, their outcome should be death. At the end of the day, I believe that they should be handed over to the Syrian government, who should deal with them. I don't think it should fall on nations that are waging war on Syria to deal with them. It should be up to the Syrian government to deal with any person in that country committing acts of terrorism.
OK, Gerard, thank you very much indeed. I get on Twitter, it makes me laugh when people say these dreadful terrorist human beings would be denied by the death penalty. What about the human rights? They say viciously killed. Surely they had a human right to live. They've lost their human rights, says Carl. I think, Carl, quite a few people say that and feel pretty angry about this. This debate would not be necessary once both our government and the US realise that it would be a worse sentence in their eyes if they were kept in prison for the rest of their lives. Executions would make them martyrs in their minds, says James. And, yep, that is perhaps a worry that people maybe want, in some cases, to be martyred. Nigel, this is a very dangerous development. Before we know it, we'll be sending other people that fall under the term extremist to the US to face the same fate, says Ian. Nigel, these monsters want to die as martyrs. Let them rot in prison, says Tony. So a few of you now saying, actually, the best thing would be to keep these people in prison for life and not allow them to be martyred. It's a powerful argument. Stuart is calling from Canterbury, another new caller to this show. Stuart, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm just perplexed by our hypocrisy over all of this. You know, we wanted to kill them in Syria, welcome them back to our streets, and now we've got no qualms about them going to America. I mean, where do we stand on this, really?
Well, where I stand is we should never even take them out of Syria. Hand them over to the Syrian government to... If they're going to be executed, I honestly believe they should be executed by a Muslim country. Nice. But like a few of your Twitter guys have said, if the Americans execute them, then they suddenly become martyrs and therefore breed more of the fanatic lunatics. I mean, I'm ex-army. I'm really struggling to be honest, mate. In actually curbing my language here. I'm going to do my best, though. Yeah.
Please do. Please do.
I can't stand them. I've got no qualms with anybody with a different view to me. But as soon as somebody becomes a terrorist, then they are just scum that doesn't belong on this planet, and they should be just absolutely eradicated. Doesn't matter where they are in the world, what religion they say they are, and all that sort of thing. But no, if the Americans execute them, then they're just becoming martyrs, Nigel. It's as simple as that. There's no.
But Stuart, will they? I understand your passion, but will they get a fair trial in America, in your view?
Well,
it's tough, isn't it?
It's pretty much you're right. It is tough, but it's pretty much we're going by civilized court laws and civilized justice.
Yeah.
In a country with political correctness and all the rest of it. Nigel, welcome to reality. War is not politically correct. These guys are terrorists. They're not politically correct. Why on earth should they come under our protection, our laws, when they blatantly out to kill us? I mean, slicing somebody's head off with a knife. Tell me that's natural.
No, look, it's utter barbarism. Where did you serve, Stuart?
Oh, mate, I was 1st Battalion Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment.
Mm-hmm.
And I served Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah, all them pretty places that weren't on the Thomas Cook website at the time.
Yeah. So you've seen you've confronted terrorism personally?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Well, you feel very strong.
Oh, mate, you have no belief. You would not believe how much I hate terrorists.
Yep, Stuart, you've made that point very, very clearly, and I'm sure that will have really, really impressed itself upon many, many people. Rob says, execution is what they deserve. Sandra says, Nigel, let them go to America for the death penalty. I'm not detecting too much sympathy for these two so-called British Beatles who were involved in utterly barbaric acts, and there is little sympathy, it seems to me, for them being sent to America because they are no longer British citizens. Remind ourselves who they are. Alexander Coetzee, El Shafi El Sheikh, and they were involved in the killings of David Haynes, Alan Henning, James Foley, Stephen Sotloff, and they are the high-profile ones that we know about, that were recorded and put out over the internet. Goodness knows what else they were involved in. But it does bring the other debate about whether we'd ever bring back the death penalty in our country. I'll tell you my view on that in a moment. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:30. Is it right that two former British jihadis could be sent to the USA and potentially face the death penalty? And the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, seems to be very unconcerned by it and has not sought assurances from US Attorney General Jeff Sessions that they may not ultimately be executed. Before I get back to that, Theresa May today was speaking at a question and answer in Gateshead. That's after she'd visited companies in Newcastle to reassure them about her blueprint for the future. Now, normally, all we ever hear from Mrs May is the same thing, and I'm convinced they wind her up at the back in the morning, and she says, Brexit means Brexit, we'll be taking back control of our laws, borders and money, we'll be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. That's what she says, let's hope it happens. But today, rather more of a personal side of the Prime Minister when she took some questions from the public.
Prime Minister, you probably have the world's most stressful job at the moment. How do you cope and how do you unwind?
Well, it's there's several things I like to do. I like walking, so my husband and I enjoy going walking when we can, taking holidays, walking. I enjoy cooking, which has a benefit because we get to eat it as well as make it. I have over 150 cookbooks, so I spend quite a lot of time looking at cookbooks. I do enjoy, if I get the time, watching. I don't know anybody, does anybody here know the American series NCIS? I quite like watching NCIS when I can.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. That's about as likely as when Gordon Brown was asked what music he liked when he was Prime Minister. He said, I listen to the Arctic Monkeys. Of course he didn't listen to the Arctic Monkeys. He was told to do that by his press and PR team to show the world how exciting he was. The chances of Theresa May following the NICS American programme are just about zero. I should have thought by the time she finishes a day's work, she's absolutely shattered. I think almost anybody in in leading positions like that would be. Anyway, you can believe it or not believe. Walking, we believe. Cooking, we believe. American crime TV shows, I think we find that rather difficult to believe. Hey, maybe I'm wrong. If you think I'm being really unfair about the Prime Minister, then you can call me on 0345 6060 973. Back to the potential extradition of these two former British jihadis to America, where they may face the death penalty. And my next caller has been described to me by the team as an Englishman in New York, as the song goes. John, you're a new caller to the show. Welcome.
Hi there, Nigel. Thank you.
Hello, not a bit. So, you're living in America, working in America.
Yep.
Most states here do still have the death penalty, don't they?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
So how do you feel? How do you feel about this?
Okay, without sounding too crass, I think it's brilliant. I applauded the TV when I heard about it earlier.
Right.
And I think, just to put a bit of context on it, I think these weren't just crimes that these two men had committed; they were atrocities. My personal experience, I actually worked in prisons in England for a while, and I don't think they're hard enough. Some people that were serving time in there described it as spending time off, and then once they get back onto the street, they go straight back into what they were doing before. I think he's absolutely right not to seek assurances on the death penalty, because these two people need a higher level of punity. We certainly can't deliver that in England, in my experience. I think our hands are tied to the Human Rights Act, and I don't think the level of punity that these crimes deserve can be offered in England. And I think if they can be offered elsewhere...
John, these crimes are truly appalling, and that is not, in any way an over-exaggeration. But, John, do people like this? Do all people at least deserve the chance of a fair trial?
Yes, I think they do. But then, that's certainly not the grace or the courtesy that they extended to the people that they executed. So
no, it isn't.
They deserve that themselves.
Well, but should we, as a society, lower ourselves to their levels?
No, I think that's a very valuable point. I think it's very easy for one person to get emotive, but when we look at it culturally and on a sociological level, I think it's our strength that we can hold everybody accountable to the same standards.
I think that's it's important.
I think the misstep here is that we think that we can deliver, the end of the spectrum. Should the punitive measure to this be death, then I would certainly, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. And if the Americans can deliver that, perfect.
That's fine. John, thank you very much indeed for your call. I detest the death penalty, I get, by text. But America has been independent since 1776. It's not for us to tell them how to run things. Let them decide on a punishment if these men are found guilty, says Nigel. People saying, let them rot in jail, need to understand they would spend the rest of their lives infecting fellow inmates with their disgusting ideology. Jailing these animals simply breeds more of them. Strong talk from Neil in Leigh-on-Sea. But it's a subject that raises very strong passions. I still have to say that I think the death penalty is unlikely to be returned in the United Kingdom. I look at that case of Derek Bentley back in the early 1960s. It took place in Croydon. Some may have seen a film about it, where Bentley shouts, "Let him have it." The other guy's got the gun. Did Bentley mean shoot him? Did Bentley mean give him the gun? No one quite knew, but he was found guilty and he was hanged. And he had a mental age of 14. And I asked myself, do I want us to return to a system like that? I would not vote if there was a referendum for a return of the death penalty unless I received some really very, very strong assurances indeed. That's my view on it. But if America wants to have the death penalty, that is entirely up to them, and certainly not for us to lecture or moralise on it. That's how I feel. How does Graham in Derby feel? Another new caller to the show. Graham, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Nice to speak to you. I'm a very proud member of UKIP up in Derby.
Oh, right, very good. One of the areas in which UKIP did well recently, I know that. But hey, UKIP has never taken a stance on politically on this issue, other than to say that if people wanted to have a referendum on the issue, they should be allowed to do so.
Yeah. Well, what it is, I believe that those two guys should be tried in the country where they committed their crimes.
Right, so Syria. Well, it could be Iraq, couldn't it? Because I think I'm right in saying they perpetrated the crimes in both of those countries. So better that the Syrians deal with them rather than the Americans, yeah?
Yeah, well, look at this, Nigel. If a foreigner imports drugs into a foreign country, they are tried in that country and punished by that country's laws. Now, some of these countries have the death penalty for importing drugs. And I don't see any difference myself. If you go to a foreign country and commit the atrocities that these two animals have done, then they should be tried in that country where they hurt the people.
So if they were found, tried in Syria and found guilty in Syria and executed in Syria, as opposed to that happening in the USA, there may be less chance of them becoming martyrs and encouraging other young people to go down that route.
Absolutely.
Do you know what? I think that is actually quite a persuasive argument. Graham, I thank you very much indeed for your call. On Twitter, the death penalty via proxy is not something we should be sleepwalking into. I'd rather we introduce it ourselves than delegate it out, says James. James, I understand the argument, but these are no longer British citizens. That privilege has been stripped from them, and quite rightly too, in my view. Christian is calling from Billericay, a new caller to this show. Christian, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. So how do you feel about this issue?
First of all, I'd just like to say two things. One thing, thanks for taking the call, and I'm quite a big fan. I describe myself as a right-wing liberal, and I know that's two words that don't often go together.
Well, I think you better explain that for all of us, Christian, don't you?
A lot of my views are quite liberal, but in terms of things like the death penalty, in terms of immigration and things like that, but at the same time, I voted for Brexit. I voted for UKIP at the last general election. So before that, voted UKIP. So I think a lot of my views are quite liberal, but at the same time,
Christian,
are quite nationalist.
Can I just ask you? Ask you, what bits are liberal of your views?
I think a lot of stuff. My view on immigration is quite liberal. My view on the death penalty, I think, is quite liberal. My view on everybody should be entitled to the same rights, no matter where they're from or what they do for a living or their social stance. And like I say, I think right-wing liberal, I think, is a term. Okay, right. Now
no, it's not. And I was fascinated by it, and thank you. So, in terms of this issue, is it right that Sajid Javid has not sought those assurances?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because the last caller said one thing that said that if you allow them to be killed, they'll be martyred. I don't think that should be any argument whatsoever. We shouldn't look at what punishment we give someone for doing whatever they've done on what their views are. It should be the same rule for everyone. So no matter what you do and what your views are, whether you're going to be made a martyr or you're just going to be, you want to be killed or you want to go to prison, you don't want to have the death sentence, it's irrelevant what you want. You've given up that right. You've become a criminal or you've done something, a heinous act. Therefore, you get the same punishment that everybody would get. Now, in terms of them losing their citizenship, yeah, rightly so. They should not be allowed to be an English citizen. But the fact of the matter is they were born, I think,
British citizen.
If I'm right, they were born in England or somewhere within Britain. They were raised in this country. They went to school in this country. They used the NHS in this country, all that sort of thing. And so they are inherently, no matter what they've gone and done, they're inherently British. And I think one of the major reasons I would say no to any or wouldn't want the death penalty to be brought back is because we believe that we can rehabilitate people. No matter what they've done, people can be rehabilitated. And if we're going to believe that, then why should we believe we can't bring back the death penalty?
Well, I think maybe when we're dealing with extremist ideology, the thought of rehabilitation, maybe, should we say, overly optimistic, Christian? Christian, would you be happy if they were tried in Syria where they committed the crimes?
Yeah, if I went to America tomorrow and I punch someone in the face in America, very unlikely I'm going to do that, but if I punch someone in the face in America, they wouldn't send me back to Britain to be tried for assault. They'd try me in America, and I'd be, I'd have to deal with those. Maybe they should be given back to Syria or Iraq.
Yeah, quite a lot of people feeling that. Christian, thank you for your call and your interesting perspective. Tory tries to correct us by saying, in America, the death penalty is dictated by each state. Some have it, some don't. Tory, I think we'd made that clear at the beginning. Not every state in America has the death penalty. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on RBC, and it's now 7:46.
Christian, it's John.
So, is it right that Sajid Javid has not sought assurances from the US Attorney General these two former British subjects could face the death penalty? How do you feel about it? And so far this evening, every single caller has been a new caller to this show. And here's the message. Anyone can ring in, anyone can do this. There's nothing to be scared of, least of all me. And by the way, if you've got a very different opinion to me on anything in politics or current affairs or life, you are welcome on this show. You will always get a fair and polite hearing, provided you're polite too. Let's go to Katie in Sunbury, a new caller to this show. Katie, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. I have to say that I disagree with the Home Secretary's decision not to ask for these assurances about the death penalty. And I think it's an ideological stance on whether or not we agree or disagree as a country with the death penalty. I don't agree with it, and I think it's extraordinarily dangerous to start saying the statements that have been bandying around about the fact that they are no longer British citizens, because I think citizenship doesn't justify whether or not somebody does or does not deserve to die. And that's certainly what's coming across. And I find that a very, very difficult and uncomfortable concept to have. I mean, if we talk about, for example, drug law has been something that has been brought up previously in this part of this hour, as part of this conversation. And actually, our government would intervene and has intervened in cases where people have been... The grandmother, I don't know if you recall the case of the grandmother who had smuggled drugs into some country and had been imprisoned there.
I think it was Thailand, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, I can't remember the exact details of it, but we do intervene where we think that either the law they will not receive a fair trial, or the conditions in which they will be kept don't meet a certain standard. And I think we cannot have one rule for one law and one rule for another. We either have the same approach or we don't.
Well, Katie, you could argue that on moral stances in the past we have interfered with other countries' affairs. Slavery, a very good example. When we finally, after a very long campaign by Wilberforce and others, when we finally abolished slavery in this country, we then tried to stop other countries, using slavery. So we did in that case. It's a long time ago. It's the early 1800s, but we did try and, wield influence over other countries. But if the argument doesn't impress you, that they're no longer British citizens, should we, Katie, be saying to the American states who have the death penalty, we think you should change your laws?
Well, I think it's very well established that we do think that, and I think in previous cases, I'm not aware of specific cases because I follow it that closely, but certainly from the conversations that has been had throughout the course of the day and this evening, is something that has happened previously, where we have requested these assurances when extraditing people to the US, and I don't see why we're not doing it in this case. I think we either do it in every case or we don't do it at all, and I'm in the camp that we should do it in every case, if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense, although this is an oddity, because actually, whatever Sajid Javid says is now pretty much irrelevant, given they haven't got British passports. Surely that's true.
Yes, but again, it comes back to the issue of citizenship, and I actually feel like, as a nation, citizenship should not define whether or not somebody deserves to die. It's like saying that, because you're from France, because you're not a British citizen, we don't care if somebody tortures you or if somebody treats you in such a way that you die, and I just don't think that's acceptable.
Okay, and Katie, can I just ask you one last quick question? If they are going to be tried overseas, in countries where the death penalty may well be applicable, would it be better they be tried in America or in Syria?
I would definitely say in America, because I feel like it is more likely that they would have a fair trial in America, a trial by jury, etc. I don't know what the legal system is like in Syria, but of the two, I would probably pick America.
Okay, Katie, you've made the counter-argument very well indeed, and I thank you for doing so. Now, my next caller, we're going to call him Jason in Gloucester, but he's not actually Jason. But welcome to LBC. And I understand that you knew one of the Beatles.
Yeah, hi. I studied with Jihadi John, as he's known to the public, but I knew him as Mohammed Amwazi.
Yes.
Okay, so
and what? And can I just ask what ages you knew him?
I knew him from about sort of 14 to 16, so sort of 13.
Okay.
16. Yeah.
And were there any reasons, Jason, to think that he might become this monster?
No. We were, this was sort of, about sort of 15 years ago, so you could probably guess my age from the maths. And at that time, he was he was different, but it wasn't in the sense of because of sort of what he sort of displayed. He just seemed like a sort of inconfident, a child who was not really confident, and sort of stayed in the background. But it started to develop quite soon, and I remember hearing about him and seeing him, and he was changing rapidly. He started growing his beard, and he was getting very religious, and I knew some of his family members who were getting very concerned. But obviously back then, the climate was very different. So that was at the time seen as someone who was just basically becoming closer to his religion. And actually at the time, we sort of thought, oh, he's doing a good thing. As a fellow Muslim, you sort of do want to, at some stage in your life, practice your faith.
Okay.
And, it's a part of you. You grow up like that. And so we sort of thought, oh, okay.
And did you, Jason, as he became more religiously devoted, did that draw you closer to him or further away from him?
No, my good close group of friends, we're all Muslims, and we realised very quickly something was not right. We'd see him in the street, and he wouldn't say hello. He'd be on his own. He'd be wearing sort of the traditional dress, and something wasn't right. And I remember speaking to a family member of his, very close to him, which I won't mention who, and she raised serious concerns to me at that point and said, we're really scared for him. He's getting very, very serious. And at the time I was very young, and again I misread probably the signs, and I said, oh, it'll be fine, it's just a phase, and I guess. But
he wasn't. But he wasn't, Jason. Now, he, of course, as you know, Jihadi John, of course, was killed by a US airstrike back in 2015. But he was part of this group of four. How do you feel? How do you feel about the fact that the two of them, Alexander Coty and El Shafi El Sheikh, how do you feel about the fact that they've had British citizenship stripped from them, and they may well go to America and could face the death penalty? How do you? I mean, it could have been your teenage friend, couldn't it, in this position?
Yeah. I feel it's perfect. I think it's the right thing to do. I feel it's the elephant in the room in this country. I'm a fellow Muslim, and I'm not sitting here defending them. I think it's disgusting what these guys do. There's a lot of guys like myself who are, second, third generation children who don't agree with what they do. And I think it's right to do that, because I said to your producer, they're British by paper, but within themselves there is this burning desire to, they hate the country. And, I've had debates with
strong stuff.
But I could tell you, because remember, I to be honest with you, I studied with Jihadi John, but there's a lot of other guys who he knew, who I know were also involved in that circle. And I won't say names, obviously, but
no,
believe
please.
me, I know from the conversations I've had and who these guys are. And trust me, there is an underlying hate towards this country.
Well, and Jason, I want to say the way you're speaking out against this is phenomenal. And very important that you do. Can I just ask you, Jason, and time as ever ebbs away from us. I'd love to speak to you for 20 minutes. I really would. But can I just ask you, understanding all that has gone in behind this, would it be better for these two to be tried in Syria or America?
America.
America. OK, fine. Well, listen, I have to say that's an outstanding phone call, Jason. I know you're not really Jason, but thank you for that call. Well, wasn't that interesting, folks? You know, someone that grew up with Jihadi John, saw what was going wrong. He's a Muslim, and he spoke out against fellow Muslims that behave in this barbaric way, and that, I think, is a very good, excellent and healthy thing. It'd be a massive mistake in the wake of this case or any other if we as a nation decided to go to war against an entire religion. As we just heard from people like Jason, you know, it is the minority that have been radicalised, and they're dangerous to all of us, every single one of our communities in our country. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'll be back in London tomorrow at 7. Coming up tonight at 10 o'clock, it's Ian Collins, but up